very happy to be here today and to also welcome Francesco Ripaccioli from the Canicchio di Sopra winery in Montalcino, which I'm very, very happy to have him here today. As you guys all know, I am a huge fan of the wines of Montalcino. The report that we just put out a few weeks ago, I'm sure was a testament to that. Also to the amazing vintages that are coming, and a very big part of what's been going on in Montalcino. Francesco has been a big motivation behind all of these positive changes. So welcome, Francesco.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Venus, for this great opportunity that you gave to us in this very particular moment. I'm very honored to be here. It's also a bit emotional. I mean, I hope will be a nice talking with all the Venus readers.
Oh, I'm sure. And also we have, we're going to be taking a lot of viewer questions. So guys, if you have any questions, make sure to send them in early enough so that I can make sure to get them in front of Francesco. We're here not only to talk together, but to also include you guys in the conversation as well. So I guess, one of the first things in everyone's minds, because at this point, we're so separated from each other, unfortunately, due to current circumstances, is, how are things in Montalcino? How have things changed? How are things progressing?
So let's say Montalcino, it's, we like to say sometimes that we are like in a lucky island, no? Because for sure, if you think about the space we have at our disposition, all the countryside, it's a good place to stay in this particular moment. We have our vineyards, we have our lands that we can walk around every day. So that's a big fortune. But Montalcino is a small town, a small villa, but it's also part of the world. No, I mean, people knows Montalcino, the name. It's very famous, and we have almost not being a very touristic place, but Montalcino has almost 500,000 people per year that came to visit it. And you know that United States is like one of our first market for export and for incoming of people. So the situation, it's bad from this side, because this is the season where we start to welcome people and everything is closed. We, like Canicchio, we also have a small relay, a small hospitality part of our estate that we decide to close up, and we don't know when we are going to reopen. So we can feel also this lackness of people. And so the situation is it seems very unreal, no? It's like we are suffering for what is connected about our production, especially for our estate. You know me, we very focus a lot of our attention to the restaurant market during the years, because I found in this market a lot of friends, but a lot of, first of all, a lot of very professional people, a lot of very good sommelier that they become ambassador of our wines. So at the same time, I'm very sad because these people are in this moment, they are unemployed. And so also for us, it's not easy because that's one of our main market.
Right.
On the other side,
we're all trying to evolve with the current circumstances, what it really comes down to.
Yeah. On the other side, we have the works in the vineyards, no? We cannot stop. So it's, from one side, you have not depression, but the situation is not very good. On the other side, our mind is always every day involved in the operation we are doing now, because now is a very crucial moment of the year for the vineyards and for the cellar, because we are bottling what will be the wine release next year, 16 vintage, and there is big pressure because 16 is a very good vintage. And the vineyards is the time of the selection of the gems, so it's a very crucial time. And we are trying to approach following our philosophy, no? The mentality we have, we are always set up on a very long-term project, because we release a Brunello after 5 years. So our mind, we cannot stop our mind because there is 1-2 months of lockdown. So we are thinking to do The same thing, same kind of investment that we did in the past to try to keep the quality as always. So,
well, how large of a team do you work with in your winery?
Sorry?
How large of a team do you work with in your winery, and how has it affected, the processes?
So the team working with us, we have 3 people that work with us like fixed employee, but we work mainly with the external team for specific works in the vineyards, because we do everything by hands in the vineyards. So all the selection, everything is made by hands. And this is a choice that we made almost 10 years ago to find a very good team, which is not our fixed employee, but we can, in this way, we can have more people in a shorter time, so we can make all the operation in the right time. Mm-hmm. So that's the motive, because we have only 3 fixed employees, and then the rest is just coming for this operation.
Well, okay, let's move on to basically talking a little more about your winery, about your history, about your family, because I think that's what people are really here to listen to. As I was saying about how we all evolve, I think one of the greatest things that could possibly come from this situation is how we change our communication between each other, but also between our customers. I've been very fortunate to be able to taste with you on many occasions throughout the years, going back many vintages, and tasting, what was created by your father, what was created, by you and your siblings when you first took over, versus what it's evolved into today. And your winery being one of the most historic wineries in Montalcino, maybe tell us a little bit about, how it started, the involvement in creating the consortio, and then, how you evolved to where you are today.
Yeah, so the estate, as you said, is an historical producer. Canalicchio di Sopra is an historical brand because it was one of the 20 founders of the consortium. So it's when the history of Brunello became an history of market, when the wine, there is an history before then the foundation of the consortium. I always like to remember there are very prestigious producers they used to make wine before the 1967, but let's say that a bit of explosion of this wine starting from this year. So we are historical because we were one of them. So in the person of my grandfather, Mr. Primo Pacenti, he was one of the founders, and he was also the founder of Canalicchio di Sopra. So we can say that we have been one of the actors of the growing of Montalcino in the last 60 years. We always been since when the Brunello started to become a wine from the market. The history of Canalicchio di Sopra is the history of 2 families. So my last name is not Pacenti, but is Ripaccioli. The founder was my grandfather, Primo Pacenti, and he bought the Canalicchio di Sopra property in 1958. He planted the first vineyards in 1962, and he made the first bottle in 1966. This is why one of the reasons this year we are celebrating our 50th harvest. We put these small stickers on the label. 2015 vintage is a 50 harvest for Canalicchio di Sopra. And then it happened that from my father's side, his family, they came from the Grosseto province, so not far away from Montalcino. They immigrated here in the 50s. They bought a small estate in the Montosoli Hill. So the hill just in front of Canalicchio, still talking about the north side of Montalcino. So they never made wine before, so they just planted small vineyards to sell grapes. In 1987, they decide to join together. So they start to make a wine from 1987 under the brand or the umbrella of Canalicchio di Sopra, but blending the fruit of the 2 different...
the Canalicchio crew and the Montosoli crew.
Canalicchio and Montosoli, yes.
Right, into one Brunello.
Yes. So, so from the second step, we can say second generation is from 1987. And then we arrive like a third generation officially like in 2001, but we can say we take over everything in 2007. It's me and my brother and my sister. And the evolution, I mean, I don't like to talk about this passage between my grandfather, Primo Pacenti, my father, Pierluigi Ripaccioli, and our generation like a changement, but like an evolution, like a normal evolution. So we take the let's say the production control from the vintage, from the harvest 2007, and the changement was, I mean, the evolution was in the research of much more purity of the fruit, much more cleanness, and keeping let's say some of the good things of the tradition. But we always, in our mentality, in our philosophy, we always like to be outside of the fight between traditional and modern producer. We prefer like to say and to be classified like a classic producer. That it's much more the idea we have of a wine linked with the terroir, with the place where we are.
I actually love the term progressive. But yeah, absolutely. You guys respecting tradition, but always looking for ways to improve, right? In the picture that we have up here, is this the winery that we're looking at the bottom of the hill here, and then Montalcino moving up the hill?
Yeah, so the picture that I sent you, this is where is Canalicchio di Sopra today. So you can see the big construction is the cellar, but this is, in this picture, there is not a new cellar. So it was just the old cellar, but it is already in La Casaccia, which is where we moved the production in 1995. Just a bit up, you have the Canalicchio and our relay, and the Canalicchio, the original house of Canalicchio di Sopra, which is now a private house. So we are here, this side, you're looking for, you see Montalcino on top. This is the northeast side of Montalcino.
And I'm interested in knowing, you know, at a time when many producers had decided that the best Brunello would be a blending of northern and southern vineyards to basically find a balance. What made your family decide to stay northern and to remain that way to this day?
So I think that there is like a real reason in the blend. It's not a bad thing, no? I mean, it's something to make a much more complete wine. And we made blending wine for forever if we talk about our Brunello. But the choice for us has been always to be specific from the north side of Montalcino. And there are two reasons. The first reason is very simple. When my grandfather bought the estate, he was mezzadro. So mezzadro, he was a farmer working, for other owners. Okay. And he was in the north side. So he had no knowledge about south, west, east. So he bought the house, the podere, the nearest, which was available to start his dream. So if we were in the south, maybe today we were here talking about an history of the south producer of Montalcino, no? So it's not a matter of the beginning, is not a matter of big choice, because we start from nothing. But then in the years, he always liked to be very specific. So my grandfather and my father, and then us, we decide not because this is the best place or the worst place. It's not a matter of classification. It's much more a matter of identity that we try to build during the year. So we prefer to say, okay, we can grow in our side. We plant more vineyards. I mean, we have now 20 hectares of vineyards, 45, 50 acres of vines today that we grow year after year only in the north side of Montalcino. Just for the reason, I repeat, the beginning, because we were here, and then we decided to keep the identity to be just in one side.
Right. Well, and it's, again, talk about progressive, because now Montalcino is so much more focused on each producer showing their individual terroir and also trying to organize more of the vineyards, which you've been a huge proponent of. And we're going to talk about also how you did that to a certain degree in a little bit. But before we go there, what I would like to know is, you're talking about, let's talk about the vineyards. Let's talk about what you've been changing there, because I know you've been doing a lot of work over the years in the vineyards. And that work is what has resulted in these cru bottlings that you've started to release. And amazing also how so many other producers are now also joining in on this same theme of identifying crus. So tell us a little bit, about how the vineyards have changed over time, some of the refinements that you've made there.
Yeah, when we started, we tried to take the knowledge of my grandfather and my father and to add something, but also to go a bit back to the roots of the knowledge, because there was like a period in the 90s where maybe sometimes everywhere we made some mistakes, no? Also with the use of the chemical and this kind of thing. So what we did in the years was first of all to understand all the composition of soil of our vineyards. This was very important for us to make to understand the potential of every vineyard, to understand the potential of making a wine much more for aging, a wine much more for like a Rosso di Montalcino to enjoy a bit younger. So it was very, very important. So we make a very big study of the vineyards to understand the soil composition, the components of the mineral elements, which were very important, then to understand how every vineyard is influenced by the weather, or how strong is the character itself of the soil into the wine. And then we try to go back to the roots. So we made a very strong, you show a picture of our green manure, which is one of our methods. So that we are doing fertilization in a very natural way. So step by step, without just make one in 1 year, but step by step, we are trying to do something that can be much more sustainable, but at the same time trying to keep the quality of the and the production of the vines, no? Because our idea is very strong linked to the French lutte raisonnée. So to do something that we know that we have to make grapes. We know that this can be an impact, but it has to be the lower impact is possible. That's our vision of what we are doing in the vineyards. And so this made this help us to make better wine since the beginning, because in the research of purity of fruit, which was one of our goals since the beginning, and still today one of our goals since that we are now trying to reach every year, it's very important that you make everything at the best in the vineyard. So we invest a lot of money, a lot of time, try to get the best grapes is possible, and you can only do by working in a very sustainable way in the vineyards.
So how is this, considering that the Brunello, so one thing I just want to show everybody is that I'm very happy to be able to open up one of their vintage bottles of Brunello di Montalcino, the 1996, that I'm going to open up here.
With the old label.
And it's interesting too, because you and I have both tasted this vintage together. We've also had the 95. One of the interesting things I've always found about your family's wines is how even in vintages, for instance, I would always have thought 95 to be a better vintage than 96, yet your 96 is gorgeous. And I found many times tasting through your wine, sometimes blind, in fact, oftentimes blind. I'm very lucky to have someone who's offered me a lot of tastes of your Brunello in a blind setting, where vintages I didn't expect to be overperforming were overperforming. So when this Brunello was made, this was your blending of Montosoli and Canalicchio. And
yes,
I believe you vinify all of your parcels separately, correct? Was it still done that way in those days and then blended?
Yeah, Montosoli and Canalicchio, yes, was vinified separately. Today we have 14 different parcels, 14 different tanks for vinification in our cellar. So also the single vineyard inside the cru are vinified separately, no? But also this was vinified separately and then blended at the end of the aging period. And one of the, of the way we always made, we're still doing today, is working on numbers, on production. So the idea is that there is always something good in the vineyards if you go to research, also in a difficult vintage. In a bad vintage, it's difficult to make a great Brunello di Montalcino, but in a difficult vintage is your work. It's your if you sacrifice some grapes, some numbers, and you make a lower quantity, you can make something very, very good with a big personality. Talking about 1996, for me, for me, it's like something that stays in the middle between 95 and 97, but I prefer very much than these other two vintages. So one of the secrets is on the numbers of production. We have a potentially now almost, as I say, 20 hectares that potentially we could make 100,000 bottles of Brunello, but neither today that we are more organized, we have a bigger cellar, a new cellar, we make no more than 40,000 bottles of Brunello. On that time, it was 96 was almost 13,000 bottles of Brunello.
What would you say now is the components of the Brunello, considering that you have started to, you now will have a Cru Montosoli, right? Which is it the 13 Reserva is technically a Cru Montosoli, just not labeled as such?
So yeah, that's official. That's the first one we made. We released like 100% juice and fruit from the Montosoli here.
So do you feel that though, separating Montosoli entirely, and also with your other Cru bottlings that just started, was 2015. Well, what amazes me is that the straight Brunello, in my opinion, hasn't suffered at all. But what's changed? Has anything changed in the Brunello di Montalcino?
So, Eric, I'm happy to hear that, because that was my big doubt at the beginning. It was my our big challenge, because when we decided to make this process, to give the idea has been always to make a unique wine, something very specific from the place where we are. Okay. So also the Brunello is very specific, because we are talking about a climate zone, which is the north side. But the reality of Montalcino, and so also the difficult sometimes to make some mapping, no? It's that we have a lot of different terroirs inside the same side of the hill, no? So it's not very easy sometimes to understand. It can change in like 200 meters. So this is a big value. I thought this is a great value that we have same side, north side, Montosoli and Canalicchio. So two different expressions of Sangiovese. I want to underline this. I don't want to cover, but I want to underline. And I start from a simple concept. For me, it's not a matter of the best against the worst. That's just to answer your question about the Brunello vintage that is not suffering. It's not that the single vineyard will be higher quality, much higher quality than the vintage Brunello, because the vintage Brunello already has a selection of grapes. I told you the numbers is only 40% of our potential production of Brunello we do for our Brunello di Montalcino. But for me, the idea of the single vineyard was much more a matter of recognition. I want to recognize there is a Casaccia every year, there is a Montosoli every year. So I went to search the two vineyards, the two small parcels inside the two Cru. They were much more constant every year. Okay, so the concept of Cru for me, it's something that you can recognize, no matter what the weather is. For sure, the weather has an influence, but much less on other vineyards. So this is why Montosoli is just a small parcel. We are talking about 3,000 bottles in 6 hectares. So, and because of La Casaccia, this vineyard is 1.5 hectares in the 13 0.5 hectares we have here in Canalicchio. So that's also the answer to your question. Brunello is not sacrificed because we are still continuing to use almost 4.5 hectares of Montosoli in the Brunello vintage, and the rest of the Canalicchio crew. But these two vineyards, for me, there was the willing to show the purity and the uniqueness of this terroir. I repeat, it's not a matter. I don't like to put in competition these two wines. Now, for me, they are my child too. Both.
Two very different expressions.
The quality, in terms of absolute quality, has to be the same. Sure. For people like me that looking when I drink other wines, I'm always looking for something, not only a great wine, but something very unique. This has become a bit more emotional because, especially when I hope we're going to make a vertical tasting in the next 10 years.
Well, one thing, just to circle back to the older vintages really quick, everybody before Francesco and I got on here today, I'd actually asked him, because I had a 95 and a 96 that I could open, and I'd asked him, which one that he thought I should open, and he thought the 96 was definitely the way to go. And when I look back at my notes, I see how many positive things I've had to say about this wine in the past. And I just want to show you, if you can see from my lighting here, the color on this is so deep and intense. Bouquet, it's mature, but this wine is still maturing. It's nowhere near the end of its life. And I'm sure if we were to open up this 95, we would find something very similar. And I'm also, this is one of those things, I was preparing for today's event. I started looking around the market and realizing that these wines can still be found in the market, which is absolutely remarkable, but great expressions of mature Brunello. So hats off to your family there. How about you though? When you're drinking wine, when you're, going to open a bottle of wine that's not your own, what are you drinking? It's something that everybody always wants to know from winemakers such as yourself.
That's always like a question that I receive many times, for sure. In my speech when I go for tasting. So I have to say, for sure, Montalcino, I have a lot of wines that I really like here. I don't want to talk about brand to not forget some of the people that I really like, I really respect. But I'm also, as I'm a big fan of terroir, I really like to drink also great wines that talk about the place where they are made from. And when we see something like this, for sure, it's clear to think about the Langhe, think about Barolo and Barbaresco, think about the Chianti Classico, think about Burgundy, even if I have less experience about this wine. But this is what we do with my friends and colleagues here in Montalcino. The new generation is experiencing and drinking wines from around the world. And this zone, I think, they are the zone they are much more connected with our mentality idea of winemaking and small vigneron like we are. So I think these are like the zone that I drink more frequently, that I have my private cellar very with a lot of bottle of many friends and producers that I really like.
So, though, what would you say is I understand what you're saying, the sharing of these different works, friends and producers and such, but is there anything in your cellar, let's say vintage wise, going back, how I'm a huge fan of mature Barolo, obviously mature Brunello. I'm a huge fan of the Rhone. Are there any other regions specifically outside of Italy, something that maybe inspires you or that you find yourself gravitating toward?
Sure. As I said, Burgundy, it's something that outside of Italy, I've been only 3 times, and it's a magic experience. It's a magic atmosphere. It's something that when you go back, you have something inside. You have new inspiration. You have also less problem, no? Because sometimes also for the person I like to make the things in a good way. So sometimes I can have a bit of pressure, especially when a bottle of wine. And I found or maybe what I feel from, for example, from this region, Burgundy, that I have a huge respect for the nature, for what the nature gives, and try to take the best from every vintage. This is what I like, and this is what I told you before. No, okay, there are the super great vintages in every region, but for me, there are vintages that are easier, or vintage you have to take care more, no, with more. With more attention. But it's very important to love and to understand all the vintage, because make also your background, your experience in the cellar.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I remember tasting your 2014 and being very impressed by it for the vintage. You know, so it's one of those things where you always make the best wine you can. Have there been any vintages when Cannilicchio has decided not to bottle a Brunello?
2002, we just made like a house bottling just to see how was the evolution, just to make like a test. We did a ship to the United States. We made for us, we have the fortune that is, for me, it's a wine that I really love. Maybe because it's also the wine of my generation. Here in Cannilicchio, we made a big jump in terms of identity, in terms of also numbers for the Rosso di Montalcino. No, so in this kind of vintages, you can have you have the Rosso. In this kind of vintage, like 2002, we made a very, very good Rosso di Montalcino. I still remember I was in New York a few months ago with one of our sales agent, Vince, in New York, and he brought like a blind bottle of 2002 for tasting with sommelier, and it was really in a good shape. So it's the sign that okay, if you cannot make a great Brunello, maybe you can make a very, very good Rosso di Montalcino. Right. And I think it's much more respectful also for the clients, no? That okay, we have to deal with the nature. We have to deal. Clients, they have to drink good wine. So it's important to put the right label to the wine, no? And this is why, for me, the project of Rosso is very important.
Also, for me, I feel like your Rosso, and I actually use your Rosso as a gauge often to get a good understanding of what's coming in future vintages, like vintages down the road. Like I remember the first time tasting it in 2016, and you know, ended up putting it in my cellar, and I slowly checked back in on those bottles and watched them evolve, which is, it's not always the case of what you can do with every producer's Rosso, but some producers, you can really get a good idea of what's coming through their Rosso di Montalcino. So with your Rosso, though, is it a vineyard selection? Is it a separate vineyard? Is it a selection in the cellar? How do you come to decide what goes into your Rosso di Montalcino?
Eric, there is only one rule that we follow every single year, which is this. We never make Brunello from vines less than 10 years old, which means that all these grapes, they go only for the Rosso di Montalcino, even if they are Brunello di Montalcino vines, no? Or planted under the appellation of Brunello di Montalcino. But it can work the opposite. And the youngest vines we have is not enough wine to make a Rosso di Montalcino, the numbers we make of Rosso di Montalcino. So also some of the oldest vines, they go in the Rosso. It's much more based on what happened during the vintage. There is not a specific rule. We have these new vines that we planted in 2014 that we are now using for the Rosso di Montalcino for the moment. But it depends. Sometimes, because you can have different situation every vintage. Usually, the Rosso is almost only from Cannilicchio, even if you can have like a small touch of Montosoli in the Rosso di Montalcino. The 2018 it has like 5% of Montosoli of grapes from Montosoli in the Rosso di Montalcino too. But it's like for us it's the grapes that has a bit more let's say, fruit-driven, a bit more approachable. They need a bit less time of aging, so they help also for early release, which is the time of Rosso di Montalcino. We don't want to make a super serious Rosso di Montalcino, but at the same time, we don't want to make a banal wine. No? So it has to give you an idea of what will be the vintage, the Brunello in the future in the bottle, but with its own identity, without trying to be the bad brother of the Brunello di Montalcino or the bad copy of the Brunello di Montalcino. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. And how big is the production on the Rosso? Because I can tell you, in the New York market, it seems like it disappears almost immediately upon release.
Yeah, production in total in Montalcino, we are talking about 4.5 million of bottles, which is doesn't reflect our proportion we have in the state, because even if we almost have only Brunello di Montalcino in our estate, we make more than 50% we bought like Rosso di Montalcino, which means that some of the Brunello we reclassificate like Rosso di Montalcino. But it's especially, I think, in the last 5, 6, 7 years, the general quality of Rosso grew up, and it's a beautiful wine to talk about the region. So we make more Rosso than Brunello di Montalcino. For the moment, the appellation in total is not growing too much like Rosso di Montalcino, because there are less hectares of Rosso than Brunello di Montalcino. But more and more producers are trying to do a bit less Brunello and more Rosso di Montalcino, which I think is also the key, as I said before, to keep quality every year, reputation of the appellation high in every vintage, also in the difficult vintage. We, as I say, we are the vigneron, so we have to make some choice. We know that Brunello, as I said, is a long-term project, so we don't need just to plant and to make money tomorrow. We need to respect what is the nature gives to us. And when it's a great vintage like 16, I have here like a barrel tasting of 16, you can make a bit.
16 is that, just so I know?
Sorry?
Which of your 16s is that, just so I know?
So I have the 3 because we are almost ready to bottle the 16 in the next 3-4 weeks. So we have the 16 vintage, which is the blend Canalicchio and Montosoli, 50% and 50% this year. We have the Vigna Casaccia, 16, and the Riserva 2016, which is coming from the Vigna Vecchia Mercatale, the same choice we made with the Riserva 10 and the Riserva 15.
Okay, but will we be seeing a Cru Montosoli? And which vintage will that be?
So the release of the Montosoli will be from 18. So it's in the barrel right now.
We have a lot to wait for.
It's you have to start from the vineyards when you want to declare in the label, no? So we started from the harvest 2018, and there is a reason. And if you want, there is a reason because I start with the Casaccia in 15 and Montosoli in 18, because they are 2 very different vintages. Okay, so they're not similar. They're different in taste. They are different in the weather that we had during this year. But we have these two different Cru, and these 2 different Cru, they are very, very different in terms of taste. Not because of the weather. As I said, Canalicchio and Montosoli, from the photos of Montosoli, if you look, you can see Canalicchio, so it's like 500 meters of distance. Here in the north side of Montosoli, northeast side of Canalicchio. So it's not a matter of climate, it's much more a matter of soil. Like
more clay limestone in Montosoli versus but almost like a Lestro in Canalicchio?
Canalicchio is clay, it's much more clay. So Canalicchio is much more clay, but is a clay that is very rich of, there is a high presence of calcium carbonate and magnesium. So these mineral elements, they balance the clay, which is supposed to give a lot of opulence, no? So the wine is very generous. It's a bit voluptuous, the wine from Casaccia, but it has everything that helps to balance this exuberance because of the calcareous soil we have here in Canalicchio. So I chose the 2015 to start with the Casaccia because it was a war vintage.
Right.
Beautiful balance with the fresh night, but was warm. So the wines are rich. Also, the alcohol is a bit high in 2015, even if it's very well compensated about the acidity. So to give the idea of the style of Casaccia, I chose a vintage that with the whether I could underline the characteristic that I already have in the soil. On the opposite side, Montosoli, it's galestro. It's more like a rocky soil. So the first sensation is not like in Casaccia that you have the sweet and silky tannins. There is a salinity, is the sapidity, is the minerality, is the almost the acidity is higher, and the wine has less impact but more deep. So it has a different dimension of the wine. And so I chose a vintage that is more fresh, to underline much more this fresh sensation. So this is why I waited after 2015 fresh vintage to start with the Montosoli, because if you think that 15, 16, and 17, there are three on the warm side. So I want to give the first single vineyard release, I have to give the right idea of the terroir, of the characteristics.
Well, you obviously made a really good choice with the 15s. As you know, the Casaccia was one of my favorite wines from the entire tastings that I did. I have a couple of questions here really quick. We're gonna bounce back a little bit in our conversation really quick. One of the first questions here is going back to your conversation about the 2002. Geronimo is asking if it was bottled as a Brunello di Montalcino. You mentioned it was like a house wine, or was it bottled as a Rosso?
Oh, we bottle like Rosso di Montalcino, almost everything, but we just made a small bottling of Brunello di Montalcino, just for here for the house, just to understand it. And it was only releasing 1,000 bottles in Italy. So you could find one bottle in Italy somewhere, but not exported. We didn't export it in 2002.
I'll have to be on the hunt. And then also we have another question here from Carlo. And he's asking more of a broad question about the region. Now, one thing we didn't mention before, but I'm sure a lot of our viewers realize, and maybe you don't, is that Francesco is actually the vice president of the Consorzio at the young age of 23 years old. It's absolutely amazing. I'm sorry.
I was the vice president.
Yes, absolutely, he was, which is a pretty remarkable thing. And we're talking about going back here quite a bit, but he probably has a really good idea about quality standards throughout Brunello. The question being, what can be done or what is not being done to improve the quality across the board? You see a lot of producers now that are really excelling, and the wines are separating themselves quite a bit from what they were 10, 15 years ago. What's bringing this quality level up? That's probably a better way to answer the question. What are these producers doing right?
So you asked me, I think that the quality talking about general quality, when you talk about the appellation, in general, in the last 10 years, it was, it's amazing changing better. I feel that there is much more identity into the wines. I think I feel this very appreciated around the world, because this is my project. We are talking about Canalicchio project, but there are many producers that are doing what we are doing. Many producers they did before the NAS, so they are really single vineyard. So I think that the quality in general in the appellation grew a lot, like average quality in the last few years, and the direction is the right direction, always to underline the diversity of the difference you can have in the terroir, to underline like a value. we don't need to blind that. We need to show this difference. This is very important, and I think it will be very appreciating, because if you know, like I'm here, no, so I know where to go. I know what kind of bottle to buy to experience what happened this year there or here, because I know what are the temperature there. So I'm here. It's very funny, this place. Like, it's very funny Barolo, no? Because from hill to another hill, because it's never boring, because it's very, very, very different from one side to another side. And I think this is the producer, they're approaching in this way, the appellation. So sure, we always need to you never stop learning, no? So you need to work very hard to understand better. We are in front of very, very big situation, climate change. There are very huge challenge for the future, but I'm positive, and I feel that there is like a very nice, is a very nice moment for Montalcino, and it's also a very nice moment of friendship. It's a very nice moment. The new generation, it's very, is sharing a lot of information that is very important, and it's also, there is a lot of curiosity. Mm-hmm. That curiosity is the first result of my curiosity 10 years ago, 13 years ago, is La Casaccia now. So we take time. Sorry that in Montalcino we make the things in a very slow way, but I think it's gonna be very interesting in the next few years, the appellation.
Absolutely. You mentioned climate change. How heavily has that affected you in Montalcino?
So we have just to help us to make a very much more sustainable agriculture. We have a very good system of checking everything, like forecast, weather, temperature, quantity of raining. So in the last 10 years, we have all the dates. And we have seen something very strange. The average doesn't change, but the peaks are up and down. So it's not a matter of real climate change here, but it's a matter of to dealing with these peaks up and down. That sometimes can be very, very, very difficult. We change some practice in the vineyards. We change the way we cover our ground every year with the green manure and a cover crop that we don't cut, and we keep to if it's a more dry season. So we make many different things, but I think the first vintage that didn't give us any parameter in the past, it was 2012. It was a very, okay, we don't know what to do in this vintage. The result was very good, but believe me, I have to say that I've been very lucky, because I wasn't able to interpret the vinification in this vintage. So I made something that, okay, let's see. I've been very lucky. I could make some mistakes in 2012.
You mentioned making mistakes in 2012, but I mean, there's an interesting thing for me, and correct me if I'm wrong, 2012 was actually warmer overall than 11, and yet the 11s come across as a warmer vintage wine, while the 12s come across as being almost like a cooler vintage, right? Am I correct? It's pretty incredible. Speaking about vintages, Luca Bruno, he's asking if you could talk a little bit about the 2008 vintage. I have a feeling he has a few bottles in the cellar and is probably interested in the 2008 vintage. Yes.
8. Oh, if you remember, Eric, that's a vintage of my heart. It's like the 96 on the 2000s, no? It's a super, super elegant vintage 2008. When I describe 2013 to talk about another beautiful vintages and very classic vintage for Montalcino. For me, when I use the word classic, is more related to a bit more fresh condition or very big excursion between day and night, especially in the month of September. So I describe 13 like with the powerful of 2006 and the elegance of 2008. So for me, 2008 is a pure elegance. It's a vintage that is there. It seems to not age because the acidity is very high. The parfums are very delicate, are not so impact. There is not, okay, we are in the north side, so sometimes you can have in our wine some licorice, some balsamic, some earthy flavors. But in this vintage, it's like 13. It's like 18. It's like you have the Rosso. Is why I decided to make Montosolo in 18 and Casaccia in 15. Opulence against more freshness. So the 2008 for me, it's like a pure elegance, very floral, with this beautiful progression and acidity. Is a very vertical wine. And it's a very gastronomic wine. That's the wine that where you are in front of a sommelier, you say, okay, give me a case because I know where to pair this wine to make some clients happy tonight, no? So that's the beauty of the wine. There are vintages that are more muscular. There are vintages they have more, you can enjoy almost alone. They have or vintage, they work perfectly with the food. That's the beauty of the wines. This is what we need to keep, the different vintages by vintages.
Well, I've got to tell you that the 96 is one of those wines that you could literally, I think I'll be smelling this all day, to be honest with you. It's one of those wines that just blossoms and it just pulls you in with every single sniff. I wish, honestly, that that Zoom would come up with a feature where we could actually transmit aroma to the people that are watching. It's absolutely...
You know, Eric, the best all vintages of Canalicchio di Sopra that I tasted.
Go ahead.
I tasted in the United States. Specifically, I tasted in Long Island at Vinifera Imports, that has been our importer, is our importer since 1979, the Dominic Nocerino and the son. And the way they keep the wine, the respect they have for the wine, it makes the wine incredible. I have to say that in many passages now we have a big cellar with a proper cellar for the old bottles, everything is perfect condition. But vintages from the 80s, from the 70s, and from the 90s, the best bottles are in New York and not in Canalicchio di Sopra, I have to say. That is thanks to the great job that Vinifera made for us for 40 years.
How are those 16s showing?
So 16, I don't want to say is the best vintage ever, because it's not in my idea of talking about the vintages. And I remember like one producer told me that for him the best vintage was always the last, no? So it's we sometimes the people think that we say is the best vintage. It's for sure like a magic vintage. It's for sure like a vintage that in terms of grapes, in terms of parameter, analytical parameter, and time of harvesting, it can be considered like a perfect vintage, because the grapes were perfectly mature, perfectly ripe, with structure, but with acidity high, because September was a big excursion between day and night. And it was a vintage was where vinification was relatively young. It's one of the relatively easy. It's one of the vintages that if you make like 2 minutes more of pumping over, you don't make any problem, because the wine can support everything. You can decide how extraction to take out. So it's a very, very complete vintage. If you want to use the word, it's very complete vintage. But it's different from 2015. So the approach of 15 is much more of impact. It has the beauty of Montalcino wines with a bit more warmness. This is a bit more reflexive vintage. This is a bit more classic vintage because of a higher acidity into the wine, because the flavors are not so sweet, but it goes much more in the direction of the floral notes. So for me, is the kind of Brunello that I really like to drink. It will be the vintage that I'm gonna keep in my cellar, my personal cellar, my Brunello and other producer Brunello. So I think that it's very rare to have two big vintages, great vintages, 15 and 16, side by side.
Absolutely.
And in two different ways. It
and
reminds me of
so
16,
beautifully.
no?
Yeah, no, they absolutely, from what I'm hearing and from what I've tasted from the Rossos, they contrast beautifully. You know, one of the best parts about the 15s I find is that they're really, you know, if you're gonna buy a case of Brunello from 2015 to put away, which you absolutely can with the best wines, you would be making a huge mistake not to open a bottle now and actually taste it. I think 15 might be one of those vintages that never really closes up. It just continues to give and to evolve. While 16, from what you're saying and from what we've tasted in the Rossos, is probably going to be the vintage that we're going to be enjoying our 15s while waiting for those 16s to evolve. Really quick, I just want to answer a question here. Geronimo's asking about the Casica as a new label. And yes, actually, Francesco has a bottle right there to his right-hand side. It's actually a really, really interesting label. It's got a real tactile feel to it. And then also someone's asking you about the 2009 vintage, but just want to mention we are running a little low on time now. But if you give us a little summary about nines and how they're showing right now.
2009? 2009 was a vintage where we decided to make a smaller quantity of Brunello di Montalcino and to make much more Rosso di Montalcino. It was the first vintage that gave us the idea to make a Rosso on Magnums. And we had some clients that maybe you remember made these sides of Rosso very, very happy. 2009, what was not the problem, but what happened at the end has been a bit unbalanced vintage, because we had a bit of like heat temperature, a peaking high, and then some raining before the harvest time. No? So it's not a vintage where you could make only Brunello di Montalcino. It's not like 2016. It's a vintage of choice. It's a vintage that has his own character. And for me, it's a vintage to drink a bit younger. So I prefer to keep 2008 and drinking 2009 right now. But in the numbers we made, we try to keep the standard of quality of Brunello di Montalcino. This is the message that I want to leave. But it's a nice moment to drink 2009 right now.
Well, Francesco, thank you very much. Just to, before we say goodbye here, I just want to, sum up to everybody. I'm very happy that Francesco joined us today. Great introduction in Venice Live to have a Brunello producer such as himself here to lead things off for Montalcino. Producer of classic, traditional Brunello di Montalcino, progressive lean, meaning that they rely on tradition, but they're open-minded. Francesco has spearheaded the research in vineyards. He's now starting to release cru bottlings. And yet, even with how amazing these wines are, there's absolutely doesn't seem to be any difference in how good the Brunello is. And the best thing about it is that you can actually find these vintages going back. Good examples, the 95 I opened today. However, don't make the mistake of not keeping your eyes open for the Rosso, because as Francesco mentioned, yes, production is higher than I expected, but this is a wine that disappears very quickly with each vintage. Francesco, thank you very much. Everyone who asked your questions, I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to continue to do these. And Francesco, thank you again. Is there anything you'd like to say closing to?
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, everybody. I know there are some very good friends from New York or everywhere in the United States following us today, and I want to send a big virtual hug to them, and I hope to see you, all you and all my friends that I have in New York very soon, because my life in the wine started in New York, September 2nd, 2007. So. I have a piece of heart in that city, and I have a piece of heart in the United States. So I hope to come back very soon. And thanks to give voice to the producer, to Venus, that it's very important for us. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. And everyone, thank you for joining us.
Ciao, Eric. Thank you.